High octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday.
Can't be too safe. Bring it on. Has there ever been a more innuendo feature?
And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous.
Just get on with it. Maybe you should get a proper job.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians
That's right.
as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Very good morning. Welcome to Bev Turner today on GB News. It's a brand new week. I'm sure there will be some good news this week. It's been a busy weekend. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak sacked the Tory party chairman, Nazim Zahawi, after he breached the ministerial code 7 times. In your view, did he take action quick enough? We are expecting Rishi Sunak to face a Q&A session any minute now about his NHS plans in County Durham. He's going to be speaking. We're going to cross that as soon as it starts. And the government is cracking down on migrants who claim to be victims of trafficking. Home Secretary Suella Braverman says that new rules will allow ministers to deport any foreign criminal, even if they claim to be victims of modern slavery. Also today, Big Brother Watch released a report, Ministry of Truth, the secret government unit spying on your truth. It is a truly shocking report showing how lockdown skeptics, people, well, like me and my panellist Laura Dodsworth today, were monitored throughout the pandemic by the government. Yeah, you heard me correctly. And we don't live in China. That's all coming up after a look at the latest news with Tamsin.
Bev, thank you. Good morning from the GB Newsroom. It's 2 minutes past 10. The Labour Party is urging the Prime Minister to reveal what he knew about the investigation into Nazim Zahawi's tax affairs and when. Labour's Deputy Leader Angela Rayner has written to Mr Sunak urging him to come clean. The Prime Minister sacked the Conservative Party chairman on Sunday after an ethics inquiry found he'd committed a serious breach of the ministerial code. Conservative MP for Lichfield, Michael Fabricant, says getting rid of Mr Zahawi was the right decision.
You know, paying a penalty is not that unusual when you're in dispute with HMRC. And YouGov, as you know, is a very big corporation with offices in the United Kingdom, America, and other countries. So I was sympathetic. But, you know, it was becoming a distraction. Yes, Nazim Zahawi did tell the civil servants that there was a dispute going on, but it should have been in writing. You have to do things properly. But I can tell you, as a former minister, that the ministerial code is quite complicated, so people do make mistakes. But I think Rishi was absolutely right to wait, and I think was absolutely right to make the decision that he did.
The government will announce a £1 billion emergency care plan today as the NHS continues to face severe pressures. Rishi Sunak is expected to pledge 800 new ambulances, 5,000 more hospital beds, as well as expanding urgent care to people's homes. That's over the next 2 years. Experts warn there should be a bigger focus on staff shortages and pay. But Health Secretary Steve Barclay says that's already part of the new plan.
Well, we're increasing the workforce. There's 10,500 more nurses this year compared to last year. We're on track to deliver our manifesto commitment for 50,000 more nurses, with over 30,000 of those already achieved. But it's not just about the number of staff, it's also about treating patients in the right place, how we maximise the use of technology, and how we give patients a better experience.
And we'll be hearing from the Prime Minister on that shortly. Last-minute talks between teaching unions and the government are being held today in an effort to avoid strike action in England and Wales. Teachers are planning to strike on Wednesday in a dispute over pay and conditions, with up to 23,000 schools affected. It's expected to be the biggest day of industrial action to hit the UK in decades, with up to 500,000 public service workers, including train drivers, teachers and civil servants, also taking action. The government says it can't afford to meet the pay demands of every industry taking action. Further strikes are also planned for February and March. Meanwhile, firefighters could vote today for their first nationwide strike over pay for 20 years. The Fire Brigades Union said its members have experienced a 12% drop in real terms earnings since 2010. Last November, members rejected a pay rise of 5%. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has urged peers to back proper penalties for disruptive protesters in a proposed new law. The government says the changes to the Public Order Bill would allow police officers to intervene before protesters become highly disruptive and use these new powers with demonstrators blocking roads or slow marching. Unions and rights groups are expected to protest outside Downing Street today against the new bill, describing it as a historic attack on democratic rights. Boris Johnson says Vladimir Putin threatened to kill him just weeks before Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The comment was made during a phone call after Mr. Johnson visited Kyiv to show support for Ukraine. The former Prime Minister told the BBC Putin said it would only take a minute if he used a missile. The government is cracking down on migrants who claim to be victims of trafficking. From today, new rules make it harder to exploit legal safeguards that protect victims of modern slavery. The Home Office could now withhold protections from anyone sentenced to 12 months or more in prison or convicted of murder or terrorism. A 16-year-old boy will appear in court today charged with the murder of a 15-year-old girl who was stabbed to death in Northumberland. Holly Newton was found injured on Friday and died from her wounds in hospital. The boy, who can't be named for legal reasons, is also charged with attempted murder and possession of an offensive weapon. New research suggests over 500,000 more people are calling in sick to work than before the pandemic. Analysis by a group called Rest Less found a 20% increase among 50 to 64-year-olds staying at home more often since 2019. The main reasons include long-term sickness and looking after family. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Bev.
Very good morning. Welcome to Bev Turner today on GB News. Here's what's coming up before midday. The Prime Minister is under mounting pressure following the sacking of Nadhim Zahawi, with Labour's Deputy Leader Angela Rayner urging Rishi Sunak to come clean about what he knew and, crucially, when. The PM fired the Conservative Party chairman yesterday following an ethics inquiry that found that he'd committed a serious breach of the ministerial code. We'll have to wait to see if his constituents give him another chance to remain as their MP at the next election. We're also expecting Rishi Sunak to face a Q&A session this morning about his NHS plans. In just a moment, we'll cross to that when we can. Also, the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has announced new plans that will make it harder for migrants convicted of serious offences to claim to be victims of modern slavery. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, will break this down for us in just a moment. And on the panel this morning, I'm going to be joined by the author, Laura Dosworth, and the political commentator, Emma Burnell. We'll get to the bottom of this, a shocking new report from Big Brother Watch, the Ministry of Truth, they're calling it, and it looks at secretive Whitehall units, which have been monitoring government critics, effectively critics of the government during lockdown, monitoring what those people, like me, were saying in order to tackle, apparently, misinformation. Claims also this morning from Boris Johnson that Vladimir Putin threatened him with a missile strike in an extraordinary phone call. And, of course, I want your views. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me at gbnews to have your say. First up, the government is cracking down on migrants who claim to be victims of trafficking. GB News Home and Security editor Mark White is here to explain more this morning. Mark, good to see you. Am I right in thinking this has been a kind of legal loophole that asylum seekers, illegal immigrants have been able to use to stay here? What's changed?
It's exactly what the government would say has been happening. So, first of all, the modern slavery rules, they were introduced under Theresa May when she was Prime Minister. And they were there really with the best of intentions to try to help those who might be trafficked in to work in criminality, prostitution, to help those individuals get out of the situation they're in and get them the help they need. However, what's been happening with the small boats crisis, and again yesterday, about another 180 people crossed the English Channel in a number of small boats, is that Albanians in particular are using the modern slavery rules. They are being told by the criminal gangs that claim to be a modern slave, that you've been trafficked across the channel, and then that makes the chances of you remaining in the UK much better, because what happens under the modern slavery rules at the moment is you claim to be a victim of trafficking, and more often than not, then any moves to try and remove you from the country are halted, while you're then put into this kind of parallel system to the asylum system. And we're told that about half of all of the modern slavery claims over the past year have been made by Albanians. So that's what the government is trying to do with this legislation, tightening up the rules around modern slavery. So basically, it will affect foreign national offenders and also those arriving in the likes of small boats or in the backs of lorries. With foreign national offenders, if you are convicted of a serious crime, so 12 months or more you're convicted of, then the government, the officials, can withdraw the modern slavery protections if that's what you've claimed has happened to you. And then if you're arriving by small boat and you simply claim that you're a victim of modern slavery, those caseworkers, the officials that have to determine whether this is valid or not, need objective evidence that this has happened and not just a suspicion that you might have been the victim of trafficking.
I wonder what that evidence could look like. Presumably that might be, details on a mobile phone?
Exactly that. That kind of information that they can check further up the line. If you see where you are heading to, they find some evidence of criminality linked to you and some evidence to suggest that actually you were forcibly removed from your home country to come to the UK to work in criminality or whatever it might be.
OK, thank you, Mark. Right, we're going to cross live now to the Prime Minister. He's speaking in County Durham. Here he is.
I was at North Tees Hospital with Amanda, who runs the NHS, and other colleagues to launch our plan to cut waiting times in urgent and emergency care, something that we've been working on for a little bit. Now, I don't need to tell all of you about some of the challenges that we're all experiencing in our emergency departments at the moment. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that. We're still recovering from the impact of COVID. We've had, I think, the worst flu season, Amanda will correct me, in about a decade, so it's been pretty tough for everyone, and we've still got far too many people in hospitals who we would much prefer, and they would prefer, to be back home in their communities being looked after. But look, we're not alone in facing these challenges. You can see similar things in Wales, in Scotland, even internationally, in Canada, in Italy, and Germany. They're all people grappling with similar challenges. But we still need to do something about it, and that's why last year, when the Chancellor stood up and announced what's called the Autumn Statement, we had to make some difficult decisions. I think you all remember what happened, and we had to do some things to get our debt and borrowing under control. In spite of all of that, we prioritised the NHS and social care with billions of pounds of extra funding, because I know it's your priority, it's my priority, and the government's priority too. But the question is, and what you want to ask me is, well, how are you going to spend that money so it actually makes a difference? Because we need to improve this. And today's plan does that, I believe. There's 5 very specific things we're doing. The first is more capacity. That means 5,000 more beds, 800 more ambulances, 100 more mental health ambulances, just to put more capacity into the system. The second thing is to increase the workforce, making sure that we've got more doctors, more nurses, more types of all professional, actually, and many of you that I've met this morning are going to be here and help us deliver on that, and we want to support you to work as flexibly as possible when you get there. The third thing was discharge. I mentioned we've got 14,000 people in hospitals at the moment who ought to be either back home or in their communities, and that's causing some of the challenges that we're seeing in our hospitals at the moment. So we've got a plan to speed discharge with particular money and some initiatives to help there. The fourth thing is having more people cared outside of hospital. I think most people don't need to be in hospital, they don't want to be in hospital, and there are some great examples where we can treat people with respiratory conditions in virtual wards, or indeed new frailty and fall services, again keeping people out of hospital, so we're going to do far more of those. And lastly, we're going to improve 111, and we're going to put different types of people into the 111 service so people can get the help that they need on the phone and hopefully end up not needing to go to A&E in the first place. So those are the 5 points of the plan, and all of that is going to have an enormous amount of support to help those trusts that need extra help. Now, I was with Kath and her team this morning at North Tees. North Tees is an example of somewhere that is doing brilliantly, thanks to the incredible joined up working between all the different people at North Tees. They've really figured out how to attack this problem and make an enormous difference to so many people's lives. And what we need to make sure is that we spread that kind of best practice out and about across the country, and that's what Amanda and I and the Health Secretary were talking to the team at North Tees about this morning. So that, in a nutshell, is the plan. With more beds, more ambulances, more staff, better social care. And if we can deliver on it, then I think we will see, in fact I know we will see, the largest and fastest ever improvement in emergency waiting times in the NHS's history. That is the ambition of our plan that we've set out today. And partly because of all the time I've spent with brilliant people like Kath and her team this morning, all of you who are training, I feel really confident that we can deliver it. Because ultimately, it's because of all of you and the hard work and the ingenuity that you bring to your jobs day in, day out, that we're going to fix this problem, we're going to improve things for patients and make an enormous difference to people up and down the country. So thank you for your help in making that a reality. Thank you for being here today. And with that, I'd be delighted to answer any and all of your questions on all things NHS or anything else, or Teesside or anything else at all that you want. I'll say, right, who wants to go first? Yes!
Hi, I'm a student nurse at Teesside University and I'm based at North Tees Hospital. As a student, it can be quite difficult. I'm a mature student. The reality is I have to work alongside my studies, which is fine. But when we're on placement, it gets quite difficult. I know as a student, I'm very grateful for the NHS bursary that you introduced, the £5,000. Really grateful. But while we're on placement, it gets really difficult. Do you ever or envisage any change to the funding for student, like nurses and allied health professions, that might just help us when we're on placement? Because if we're doing, 37.5 hours, when we're on placement, it's really hard to work alongside that. And the bursary is brilliant, but do you think there might ever be a change to funding, or just a little bit extra money for students, just to keep retention? There are people in my cohort that have dropped out. Just financially, it can be difficult. So it's just...
Yeah, Lynn, thank you, and it was great to see you guys earlier on, and thanks for what you're doing. And you're absolutely right. We recognise the challenges that were there for many of you who are trying to juggle being on your course and making everything work alongside, and that's why we reintroduced that bursary, which, as you said, and thank you for acknowledging that, because that's £5,000 a year of nurses' bursary. It was something that the RCN, your union, was really keen for us to do a couple of years ago, and we prioritised it. And I'm sure we'll get onto other things to do with pay as well later on, but that's something that it costs a lot of money, but I thought it was the right thing to do to help. Now, alongside that, you asked about other things. There are also maintenance grants that are available from memory, but we're always looking to make sure that the support we've got in place helps. And with the extra funding that we're putting in to the NHS, shortly we're going to publish a workforce plan. Right, which is something that many of you and your colleagues have asked for ages. We are going to finally do that. And as we publish that workforce plan and we kind of know, OK, great, we need this many nurses, this many doctors, this many paramedics, etc., figuring out, do we have all the bits in place to make sure we end up with that number of people is going to be really important. So we will look, as we do that, at making sure that the support is in place to get all the fantastic nurses we need. The other thing is training once you qualify. That was one of the other things that we did, which again was, I can see many of you nodding, because a lot of what you all said to us was, that's great, we do our course here, then we go and work. We'd like some support with continuous development, and we've now put in place a CPD budget for all of you. When you graduate and start work, you get access to, I think it's about £1,000 from memory, again, a CPD budget, so that you can continue learning more, doing more, and that's actually how we're going to solve some of these problems, because if you think of what all of you can do now compared to what nurses could do 20 years ago, it's changed dramatically. And if we can do more of that, it will help us have a more effective NHS and make sure you have really fulfilling careers as well. Perfect. Right, who's next? Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm a local community pharmacist, and I would like to know, are you aware, Prime Minister, of the perilous financial state that community pharmacy service is in at the moment in England and Wales? There are a lot of community pharmacies who are really struggling from a 30% cut in real terms funding over the last 7 years, and now we're at the brink of closure, and it'll not be long before you see some pharmacies closing. Can you please urgently inject some funding into the community pharmacy service? And the second question would be, have you considered a national pharmacy first scheme to ease pressure on the NHS in A&E and GP surgeries, where patients could come to a pharmacy first and be triaged in that way? A well-funded service would do a lot to help the NHS.
Yes. So, look, I'm biased on this because, as some of you may know, and Amanda's laughing, so my mum was a community pharmacist. She owned her own pharmacy. I grew up working in it most of my childhood. So I'm a big fan of pharmacies. My dad was also a GP, so I saw both sides of it. And I think your two questions actually go really well together. So how do we make sure that local pharmacies are sustainable into the future? It's figuring out, well, what more can community pharmacies do? And in the same way I was talking about nurses, if I think about all the things that a pharmacy does today compared to when I worked in my mum's pharmacy, that has evolved and changed. And to your point, I think there's more we can do. And it was one of the things that Amanda and I and the team have been discussing, is seeing how more we can move towards a pharmacy first model. We saw that during COVID with vaccinations, and bit by bit there are more services that can be put into pharmacies. All pharmacists by about 2025 or 6 are going to have the ability to prescribe, and I think that's the area that many pharmacists have said to us, say, hang on, whether it's for UTIs or other things or minor ailments, would it be possible for pharmacies to do more? And that's something we're actively looking at what does that mean for regulation, we have to get our antibiotic safety right, because if our chief medical officers were here, they would say, actually we do a very good job of this country of not making sure that people develop an immunity to antibiotics, and they want to make sure that that remains the case. So that's what they would say if they were here. But also things like blood pressure checks is another thing where we probably can do more in pharmacies. And if we can get that right, there's so much undiagnosed high blood pressure, which then leads, or the paramedics here, which then leads to people needing ambulance call out. If we have pharmacies doing more blood pressure checks, for example, getting people the treatment they need earlier, stopping the ambulance call out. So there's a lot of opportunities there, and that's all the things that we are in the process of looking at. In the same way that today we published a pretty comprehensive plan on tackling urgent and emergency care, we're going to do something very similar for primary care as well. So last year we published a plan on electives, which is in process and working, so we're getting the backlog down on elective surgery. Today the focus is on emergency care, and then the next step will be on primary care, so you can expect to hear us talk a little bit more about pharmacies then. But I always have to be careful. I said I'm biased, so I have to check my natural pro-pharmacy bias in those things. Right, who's got another question? Yes, miss.
Hi, I'm Enya. I'm a learning disability nurse by background. I'm also a lecturer here at Teesside. So there are approximately 1.5 million people with learning disabilities in the whole of the UK, and only 17,000 of us nurses in the whole of the UK. So just wondering what ideas you have for funding for learning disability services or learning disability nurse education.
Well, thank you for what you do. It's incredibly important, actually. I see in my own constituency, actually, relatively recently, I was talking to someone who does the same thing that you do, and it makes such a difference to people. So thank you for that. And thank you also for helping train the next generation of nurses that are going to come through. So one of the things we're actually in the process of publishing is we're going to have a new piece of legislation that changes all the guidance about how we treat people with learning disabilities and indeed autism. It's one of the things that I think we've learned more about over the years, and the way our current guidance and regulation is set up is probably not as it should be, and lots of your colleagues are helping us get that right to make sure that the treatment is in place for people at the right stage. We'll identify things early enough and then put the support around people that they need. Because if you look at the prevalence of it, it's gone up considerably, particularly at young age. And I think all of us want to make sure that, particularly for our young people, that we are getting them the support they need in schools to grapple with some of these things and have fulfilling lives. So that will come out, I think, later this year. But stand by on that, as well as the extra money that's going on, which we need to make sure gets down to what you're grappling with on the ground. We need to make sure that we get the overall approach and policy right in a way that in the past wasn't done properly. But now that with the new act that we're going to put forward will be fixed. Right, who's next? Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Well, actually, my background is education, so I ran a very large academy trust. But I'm not going to ask you about that this morning because I think we're surrounded by health people. So the two things that I want to ask you is you've been to North Tees Hospital, and it is in desperate need of a rebuild. So I'd quite like to ask the question, what are your plans for rebuilding some of the hospitals that really are desperate, and lots of money is lost because they're actually spending it on repairs and maintenance, whereas if they had new builds, that would make a difference. And the second question I want to ask, because it's the elephant in the room, when are you actually going to pay nurses properly?
Right. So actually, great that we do both of those together. So on the hospital maintenance side, so there's actually the NHS capital budget at the moment is the largest it's ever been, and that goes into a mix of different things. It goes into goes into R&D, which is important. It goes into upgrades. So lots of hospitals that need upgrades are currently in the process of being, I think almost 100 are being upgraded as we speak, and that could be smaller scale interventions. There's a very large programme of new builds and rebuilds, which is part of the 40 hospital programme. And we're putting in more kit into all the hospitals, right? So community diagnostic centres, MRI scanners, those types of things, building elective surgical hubs, all those things actually are going to help us get the backlog down. So with that big capital budget that we've got, those are the different elements of it, and we're trying to get the balance right between all those things. But that overall pie is the biggest that it's ever been going into that area. Now, actually, it links to your second question, right? And I'm glad you asked about it, because it's a bit odd if we manage to get through this session without talking about it, right? And look, many of you here will be thinking about it. Many of you here will be members of your union. And let me explain, where we are and what we're doing, right? First of all, as hopefully you can tell, right, the reason I'm here today, I've got enormous gratitude for all of you who are doing an incredible job, working very hard at the moment in the NHS, particularly this winter, which has been really challenging for the reasons I talked about. And that's come on the back of 2 years, which have been really challenging because of COVID, right? So believe me, I know, and as I was talking about, I grew up in an NHS family, I understand how important healthcare is and the difference it makes. That's why we prioritised it last year, in spite of the difficult things. Now then, what does that mean for pay? Look, I would love, right? Nothing would give me more pleasure than to wave a magic wand and have everyone, all of you, paid lots more, right? Of course, who wouldn't want to be able to do that? Of course I want to be able to do that. What we did do is there's an independent process that goes through this and provides a recommendation to the government. So it actually wasn't our decision. An independent process takes evidence from the unions, from the government, from others, and it says, look, we think the appropriate pay level, pay increase is X. They said roughly 5%, right? So we said, fine, we'll accept that. That's what we've put in place for last year. So, why not more, right, is your question. And that's a completely fair question. And I guess I'd say a couple of things. We've had, handful of different questions about lots of different things, right? You asked about hospital upgrades, right? We asked about community pharmacy. We asked about training for new nurses and what support we can give them, people with learning disabilities, children with learning disabilities. That gives you a sense of all the things, right, that we have to try and balance. And that's my job. That's not an easy job, right? And that's what we have to do, fundamentally, right? I can tell you, hand on heart, that there's more money going into the NHS and social care than there ever has been before. I can tell you that when we had to make some really difficult decisions last year, we went out of our way to protect the NHS and social care and give it even more, and that meant difficult things elsewhere, which I've got some criticism for, right? So I can tell you that, right? So overall, the pie is as big as it's ever been, and in the circumstances was prioritised. But then within that pie, we've got to figure out what's the right balance between pay and between all these other things that we have to do. And it's not an easy thing to get right? And, we'd like new, as you said, we want a new and upgraded hospital. We need more MRI scanners. We need more support for new nurses, etc., right? So that's the balance that we get right. It's a question about what's affordable in that pie. And I don't want to put any of your taxes up. That's what it comes down to, right? I doubt any of you would thank me if I came here and said, great, well, I've put up all your taxes, right? I don't want to do that because it's tough enough at home as it is at the moment for all of you with your bills and everything else. So figuring out how to pay for these things is part of my job, and I think we've kind of, where we are with taxes at the moment, we can't put them up anymore, right? And we need to be getting them down. So that's what constrains me on one end. And then the other thing is inflation. Right, what is the number one challenge all of you have day to day at home? It's like every time you open a bill, it's like, oh my gosh, what is going on, right? Every single bill, every single week, and it's been like that for a while, right? The most important thing that I need to do for all of you, right, not just everyone working in the NHS, not just our nurses, but everyone in the country, the most important thing is to halve inflation, right? The thing that's going to make the biggest difference to all of your lives and everyone else's life, if by the end of this year, right, bills are not going up at the rate that they have been over the past year, because that is the thing that is eating into all of your quality of life, all of your standard of living. That's the thing that says, great, I can't go on holiday this year, or I can't buy these presents, or I can't go out for this meal, I can't do any of these things because everything is just going up and up and up. I've got to get a grip of that for all of you. It is the most important thing, and if we don't do that, we won't be able to afford anything in the future. Because inflation is one of these things that this is a very young audience, right? So you won't remember, like when this goes badly wrong, as it did in the past, in the 1970s, and as I said, everyone here is too young to remember that, but when this gets wrong, and if we're still talking about high inflation in a year's time, right, it is going to be awful for all of you, right? we won't be able to afford to invest any more in anything, right? And no one will be able to spend money on anything they want because inflation would have just been going up and up and up. An important part of us getting a grip of inflation and halving it is making sure that the government's responsible with its borrowing, because if that gets out of control, it makes it worse. And it's about making sure pay settlements are reasonable and fair. And that's when you have periods of high inflation, what happened in the past is everyone said, okay, inflation was at 15%, we should all get paid 15%, and then you have a kind of vicious cycle which you never recover from. So, it would be the wrong thing to do. Of course, it would make my life easier to say, yeah, sure, great, let's just go ahead. It would be a bad thing for all of you if that meant that inflation was running really high in a year's time. We hadn't got a grip of it, and I don't want to do that for you. So even though it makes my life a bit more difficult today, I really think it's the right thing for all of you and everyone else if we just get through this. But look, I hear you, right? I hear you, I hear all of you, I talk to your unions, the health secretary's talking to your unions. We want to find a way through this. I know things are tough, and I know what an incredible job you do. So rest assured that we are trying our hardest to find a way through. Sorry for the long answer, but... There we go, right, who's next? Yes, Miss.
Hi, my name's Anna. I'm a primary care network pharmacist. Do you have any plans to tackle disease prevention? For example, heart disease or diabetes, which will keep people out of hospital and in turn ease the pressure on emergency care?
Yes, I mean, that is excellent. Well, it's a little bit what I was talking about before, about blood pressure checks. Is there more other testing that we can do in advance that does which prevents conditions? Now, I mean, I was just upstairs with one of your colleagues who's sitting right next to you with this extraordinary invention, right? I mean, look, you guys are basically, I don't know if I'm like, betraying any commercial secrets, but just basically what you have done here, what your team collectively have created is a brand new, urine-based test for something that at the moment requires, over £1,000 of quite invasive testing to be done in a hospital. And you said, figured out, hang on, we don't need to do that. We can do it with a simple, like a COVID test, right? And we can do it at home, and it costs literally 1,000 times less. And that means that many more people can go and get that test done, and we can figure out that they've got this particular condition earlier, and then we can get them the medicine that they need to stop it getting worse. Like, that is an amazing example of what is possible. But that's possible because of all of you, right? We've got some amazing researchers here who I'm really proud to say are supported by the government with a big grant. And I think one of the other things that we do in that big NHS capital budget is fund R&D, right? Which doesn't sound very exciting, but there's that government R&D money that's gone into this particular building to support that particular team who have developed this new test, which they've worked on with all of you who are practitioners and nurses to make sure that it would actually work, right? That is now going to save tons of people's lives and save us money over time and prevent bad things from happening, right? And so you guys right here are a kind of amazing microcosm of what is possible to do that, and that's why it's working. And I'm really excited about the team seeing that thing grow. But it's just a small example of what we need to do a lot more of. But it is absolutely part of the answer, absolutely. There was another gentleman somewhere over here, I think. Yes.
Thank you. Tim Thompson, I'm Dean of Health and Life Sciences at Teesside University. There was a report from Policy Exchange a few weeks ago advocating for an increase in medical places and medical schools, partly focused on the community, as we're talking about today. And I just wondered if any of that featured into your thinking around the workforce planning going forward.
Yeah, so that will be absolutely a part of it. And I think the NHS has never had this long-term workforce plan, and it needs to. Right, so we've got a plan for the future, and that's what that plan will do, right? So we'll look at, well, here's the different types of, it's how many people we need, is what they should all do, and then are we training them now? Because the whole problem is, if you decide today, yikes, we need more anaesthetists, turns out you can't magic up an anaesthetist overnight, for example. So I think that's why we need to have a long-term approach, and then part of that is working backwards to what we're doing in training schools. So that's what that plan exactly will do. I think the other thing, though, it's really important, is about the different types of role And I was going back and I was talking to some of you earlier, right? And you guys are going to go out and do these amazing jobs and help us solve this problem. But it's making sure that we have all the different types of people doing all the different types of things that we need. And it's, in primary care, it's what can pharmacists do that GPs are currently doing, right? But also, even that, what are pharmacy technicians doing today or should be doing that pharmacists could do for all of you, right? There's the emergency medical technicians, the new types of role, what nurses are doing. You know, because you're in the profession, right? All the different types of nursing qualification there are. Can we, nurses ordering blood tests, X-rays in A&E departments, which now is possible, which wasn't always possible, isn't happening, by the way, in every hospital, which it could be. So those are all the things we need to look at as well. It's not just about the number of people, important though that is. It's about making sure all of you, because you're more than just a number, right? We want to make sure that you, A, have really fulfilling careers, right, which so that you're enjoying what you're doing and feel that you're working on the stuff that you qualified and trained to do and not lots of other stuff. But also, we're figuring out how to make you all really effective, right? And that's an important part of that plan. It's not just about numbers. It's about who's doing what, are they doing it as effectively as possible, and doing it in a way that's really fulfilling for all of them. So you guys are going to help us build that plan, because you're the ones on the ground. And actually, that's why when I'm around, and Amanda and I had lots of people to Downing Street the other week. It's that really simple stuff. People saying, hang on, I work in this hospital, I'm allowed to order an X-ray, I'm allowed to order a blood test, I don't have to go and talk to the consultant, I can just speed that process up. And then I go and work at this other hospital and I can't. And we're sitting there going, well, that doesn't seem sensible, does it? Right? So it's small things like that that you guys tell us, and that's how we help improve it for you and for everyone else as well. Yes, yes, sir.
Thanks so much. My name is Johnny. I'm a local cardiothoracic surgeon, cancer lead, and run Target Lung Health Check locally. We have something in common, because I was inspired by Kath Monaghan as well, who works side by side. I'm not quite as bright as Catherine at being a surgeon. But we have run a parallel service where we have taken a nurse into the community post-lung surgery for cancer, and we visit them day 1, day 2 and day 3 post-operatively. Or post-discharge, and it's reduced our readmission rate from 30% to 9%, and reduced our inpatient stay from 6.6 days to 4.9 days. So my question is, can we have the hospital at home and the virtual wards applied to the surgical community, not only to my more clever medical colleagues?
Yes. Well, we're all members of Kath fan club here, it seems. No. So the quick answer is yes. And I don't know. So you guys will all know this because you're all practitioners. Maybe not everyone in the media will know this, but like this concept of virtual wards is actually just transformational. And what is this? What does it mean? And that's I know there's some people up here, so I'll come up to you for a question in a second as well. Sorry. So what does it mean, right? This is, as you said, that we can basically set up hospitals at home for people, right? And we can do it in areas like COPD, respiratory conditions. We can do it in areas like frailty, and the technology allows us to do that together with new ways of working that that Kath has helped develop here. And it does exactly what you've said. It means that we can stop people coming into hospital in the first place. It means we can, and it means we can get them home quicker. And actually, we were going over some of the stats this morning at North Tees, how we're able to do it. I think it was in COPD we were discussing, right? 30% reduction in admissions for people coming in because of this type of service for COPD, and a reduction in an average stay from 5 to 3 days. I mean, this is huge, right? You replicate that across the entire NHS. If we can roll that out properly, it will make a big difference. So that's part of the plan today. So when you go home and have a flick through this plan, it will say that we've got currently about 7,000 virtual ward beds, and that's going to grow to at least 10,000 over the course of the next year. And on top of that, we want to make sure that the utilisation of those beds goes up from where it is currently, which is lower than it should be. And we're going to support all those hospitals who don't quite know how to do it properly, because what you're doing is pioneering, right? And what we need to do is support every other hospital to introduce virtual wards and think that way, because it's a new way of thinking, and it requires, as Kath was saying, it requires a bit of out-the-box thinking sometimes. But if we can get everyone to do that, it's going to be amazing. And that's a big part of our plan today. So thank you for raising it. I'm just going to go upstairs. Right, we've got any questions up there? I can't. Right, yes, sir. Is that your hand raised? Hi.
I'm parent of daughters as yours. Sorry. Just wanted to know if there are any plans for dentist and orthodontist backlogs. Treatments plan are like 12 to 18 months as per the email. So Any thoughts on that, please? Thank you.
Yeah, so with regard to dentistry, so we've got about, I think, 400, some 400, 500 more dentists doing NHS dentistry at the moment than we did have, and we went through and redid the contract, which will improve the provision of services, and we're in the process of talking more to see what further changes we can make to the contract to improve things, and together with that, more money went into NHS dentistry out of that big pot of money that I talked about earlier. But the key thing is there are hundreds more NHS dentists today than there were, and the contract reforms are a part of how we can continue to improve performance. Any other questions from up there? I can't quite see. Is that yes, sir? Is that a hand raised?
Thank you. I'm a senior partner in a GP practice in East Durham, and we've just come out of delivering a significant amount of the COVID vaccination programme and now dealing with recovery. There's been investment in general practice over the last 4 years of additional roles, social prescriber, link workers, pharmacists, paramedics, to support GP practice, because the level of appointment demand has risen significantly. My question is the bureaucracy of general practice on targets and demands on performance is increasing as well? And is there any way we could reduce the bureaucracy of general practice so that our workforce can concentrate on delivering care?
Yes. So one of the things that we discussed in Downing Street a couple of weeks ago in our recovery forum when we had our session on primary care was exactly this, and we had some of your colleagues and representatives from Royal College there, and they gave me a kind of bunch of very practical things that they think we could change. So we're in the process of looking through those, and as part of our primary care plan we'll see what we can do. But that's why these things are so important. You know, people wonder, why am I out? That's very helpful, right? Because I need to hear from you what are the practical things that you think you are doing that really don't add very much value and detract from looking after your patients. And they were all well-intentioned, I'm sure. Whenever some body introduced these regulations or form filling, it was done with good reason. So then we just need to go and look and say, actually, does that make sense anymore? And we're happy to do that, and we'll be doing that as part of the primary care recovery plan. Right, yes, let's go. Question here. Sorry, Emma. Right, I'm being waved at. So
I'm just going to go back to workforce ever so slightly.
Yeah.
Okay. So obviously to staff all of these additional beds and additional capacity, both within the hospital and out of the hospital, we do need.
You were listening there to Rishi Sunak, who was talking in County Durham to a room of clinicians, nurses, doctors, explaining his ambition for the NHS. You're watching and listening to Bev Turner today on GB News. If you have just tuned in, what did you miss? Well, Rishi Sunak was stood in front of a hoarding that had PM Connect on it, which kind of is always picturing himself as a sort of broadband service, and we know how successful they are. And he talks about the 5 points for the NHS. He loves a 5-point plan, doesn't he, Rishi Sunak? And he was talking about more ambulances, more clinicians, more flexible working, more care outside of hospitals, virtual wards. Listening to this, taking it all in with me this morning, Laura Dodsworth, journalist and author, and Emma Burnell, journalist also and playwright. And ladies, we were sitting here trying to work out, weren't we? He fails to connect, Laura. It's almost regardless of what he's saying. He has an unfortunate, patronising manner. And it was it is a tough crowd, let's be honest. They're not going to be clapping him at an occasion like that. But he has an oddly sort of dehumanising approach to the NHS for a start, talking about the solutions being apps, machinery, tests, etc., more virtual wards. But somehow he can't even connect with the audience.
No, he can't. But you've got to remember that, he's not necessarily full of charisma. He's not there by virtue of a democratic mandate. He's not voted in by the British people. He wasn't even voted in by Tory members. I think it's very funny what you said about him, giving it the name PM Connect, like a broadband company. We know how well they work. But if you remember his big speech, he called it the Big Vision speech. Well, people don't call a speech a big vision speech if they actually have a big vision. Mm-hmm. Of course he's putting forward solutions like apps because he's a technocrat. And these are solutions that involve big, fancy, well-paid contracts that companies can milk, but they aren't about the people that keep the NHS running. I mean, two things he said which really struck me was he said that they don't want to put taxes up because we're already struggling as households. First of all, he doesn't have a clue. He doesn't have a clue because he's so wealthy. But that aside, it's totally disingenuous because right now we're facing pretty much the highest tax burden since World War II. And British households are paying on average £821 per household more than they were the year before. So we're already paying more taxes. How could they put taxes up more? The second thing he said, you know, we've got to get inflation down. Now, bearing in mind that energy and petrol prices are coming down anyway, they're not rising as fast anymore. This drop in inflation is going to be nothing to do with the government's actions. In fact, they could bring inflation down more by dropping duty and taxes on petrol and energy. Instantly, inflation goes down, our cost of living goes down.
And don't we wish he was honest about that? Like,
yes.
If he was just honest and said, look, great news, you know, fuel prices are coming down, we're going to be seeing that in our inflation. Why, Emma Burnell, does this government, and particularly Rishi Sunak, not feel they can be honest with us and treat us as though we aren't idiots?
I mean, that is, for me, as a communications person, his biggest problem is he does seem to talk to us like we're a bit stupid or a bit young, like primary school children. It's really hard. I mean, he's a human being. He has strengths and weaknesses. But one of his big weaknesses is that tendency to just feel like your second least favourite primary school teacher. So he's sometimes tiggerish, and there are times where that might feel appropriate, but it just, when you're standing in front of an NHS audience in January who are knackered, and have been through a really tough time and are facing multiple crises and multiple long-term challenges, to be like, oh, there's an app for that.
Yeah.
It's just a bit jarring.
Shallow and oddly... Like I say, it's this word that I keep... Every time he speaks, it's like he's a cyborg who's come from the future to push us into a future that none of us have actually voted for.
Well, I have to say, if he is, then I'm a lot less worried about the realism of AI.
You must be delighted, because he's going to lose the next election for the Conservatives.
I mean, I think anyone's going to lose the next election for the Conservatives, but he's not certain. I mean, I tweeted just now two very, very interesting things next to each other. The Evening Standard has some new polling out, which shows that he's lost 10 points in popularity since November. And then the Conservative Home do a monthly poll of, you know, the popularity of the cabinet ministers. I think he was something like 4th from the bottom. Wow. So when you're leading a political party, you either need to have the public with you or your party, or ideally both. If you've got neither, you can get nothing done.
Absolutely. The only thing that probably was... looking for one bit of good news, I thought there was some common sense. A pharmacy-first model, so that by 2025 to 26, all pharmacists should be able to prescribe. And then he did say, I have to be careful of my pro-pharma bias because that gets in the way. And I thought, well, at least you're honest about that. Right, Laura, moving on to this big story that broke in the papers yesterday. There's going to be a launch today. And you are part of this story.
I am. You know, I think that this is the biggest story of the day. In fact, I can't help feeling a little bit sceptical. This very extended PM Connect Q&A that's hogging our screens is really about distracting from the story about Nadeem Zahawi, but more important, a Big Brother Watch report that's come out called Ministry of Truth. Now, to be fair, I broke some of this in my book, A State of Fear, in May 21.
And you had said that people called you a conspiracy theorist. David Aronovich, writing in the papers, was saying, this is all nonsense, Laura Dodsworth. What a vindication for you now.
I guess so. I always thought responding to that review was probably beneath me, because over the course of time, the book was always going to stand up better than a very cheap, nasty review that relied upon ad hominem. But the point is that these units within government that are monitoring our speech online and in the media are totally shadowy. We don't know what they're doing. But a series of subject access requests and freedom of information requests has found that they were monitoring MPs, yes, MPs.
David Davis amongst them.
David Davis, Marcus Fish, journalists, scientists, myself as well. Not for unlawful speech and unlawful content, not for disinformation so much as dissent and criticism of the government. So tweets, YouTube videos, articles that were critical of the government were monitored and taken down from social media.
Just to be clear on that, so that is the government department, that is military units even within the government who have got in touch with Twitter and Facebook and said that Laura Dodsworth has put a tweet out countering government messaging. We would like you to take it down. And they did.
I don't know whether any of my content was taken down, but the launch of my book was featured in a counter-disinformation weekly report that's across Whitehall, and some choice quotes about it were included. Funny enough, at the same time, it turns out that intergovernmental letters were praising my book as thoroughly researched and succinctly laying bare the government's programming of fear. So what the counter-disinformation unit considered to be borderline disinformation, and it wasn't, was something that was being praised by fellow Department for Culture, Media and Sports staff. So what's incredible is that they had a particular focus on, for instance, vaccine passports. And at the time when the government was consulting upon them, okay, the policy was not set. They were consulting. They were flagging up tweets and videos by David Davis, Marcus Fish, Julia Hartley-Brewer, Richard Tice,
Toby Young,
and calling them vaccine sceptics, when what they were doing was criticising the mandates and the passports. Same thing happened to Big Brother Watch. Big Brother Watch actually tweeted encouraging people to sign a government website petition asking for the passports not to go ahead. And that's flagged as disinformation. So these units, which were set up, by the way, to be temporary, the counter-disinformation unit was set up to be temporary, and it's ended up being permanent, and of course grown, it's about trebled in size from what we know, have switched from monitoring enemy agents, you know, foreign countries, to monitoring British citizens. And it seems to be about quelling debate. So they were performing sentiment analysis, trying to work out how the British people feel, and then taking down speech which was completely lawful. Now, the Army's 77th Brigade, which specialises in psychological operations and non-lethal warfare, was also drafted in by the Cabinet Office's Rapid Response Unit. What's quite interesting about this Big Brother Watch report is that a whistleblower from the 77th has spoken to them and said that although they were told they're not supposed to be monitoring British citizens, they were. And I think you have to be really worried when a government and its army are not just monitoring enemy states, foreign bad actors, but its own citizens, to see who's criticising the government. That is a very dangerous state to be in. There is something rotten at the heart of government if they're doing that.
Emma Burnell, what do you think of this story?
It's so interesting. I fundamentally, I think, agree with Laura on the underlying story. I probably disagree with Laura on a number of things that she was saying that were critiquing certain areas of policy, but ultimately I think you have to take the separation of the behaviour of government in monitoring and surveilling citizens away from whether you agree or disagree on the issue of the day in which they happen to be surveilling them on. So there may come a time where I would be critiquing the government on a completely separate issue on which Laura might completely agree with them on, but I hope that she would also say, and I'm sure she would because this is the point that we're making, that it's not the government's role to quell dissent against government policy. It's the government's role to deliver their policy and make the case for it against people who might disagree with them.
Yeah.
We've seen this across the political spectrum. I was saying, so my father was Diane Abbott's first election agent, and we are fairly confident that our phone was bugged at the time. I've never done a subject access or anything like that, but back in the day, the technology was not that good. We used to hear clicking on the end of the line. Usually it was me, aged 12, and my best mate chatting about what happened in school. We used to actually joke and say, is this interesting for you lads? Yeah. Do you want to know what Nigel Jackson's been up to? But I think we have to take the principle that a government should not be behaving like that towards its citizens, out of the argument about what the issues are. And I think that's where I completely agree with Laura.
Yeah, I do think it ratcheted up, you see, during the pandemic because...
I'm so sorry, ladies. Rishi Sunak did a lot of talking for us this morning, I'm afraid. Right, we'll be back in just a moment. We've got lots more to talk about. I'm also going to be talking to Silky Carlo from Big Brother Watch, who enacted that report we've just been discussing also in the next hour. But back in a moment. See you in 2.
Hello there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office. A dry day for most of us with some sunshine, the best of which will be in the east, cloudier skies generally in the west, ahead of a frontal system that will push in for later in the day. But this cold front that's crossing the channel now, that's brought some rain earlier on It is now clearing to brighter skies, also a fresher feel for the north in particular, with cold northwesterly airflow that's easing through the rest of the day and taking its showers away with it, but further showers are likely to affect parts of Western Scotland and Northern Ireland at times, mostly light, and for many it's a dry day. Sunny spells in the east, 9 or 10 Celsius. Cloudier skies further west, 8 or 9 Celsius, so temperatures not far from average. Into the evening, though, it turns increasingly wet across western Scotland, that rain pushing its way eastwards and into Northern Ireland by midnight, arriving into northern England during the early hours. Some heavy bursts of rain associated with this system as it moves southeastwards, followed by blustery showers into the north. An early frost possible in the southeast before things turn cloudy, and for most it's a frost-free start to Tuesday. A lot of cloud about for England and Wales, some outbreaks of rain pushing south during the morning. The rain tending to peter out, and it does clear by lunchtime with brighter skies arriving. But it's a windy day, especially for the north, with gales around exposed northwestern coasts and hills, and a lot of showers coming in as well for Scotland, Northern Ireland and parts of northwest England, those showers falling as snow over the hills. Further south, it's largely dry after that early cloud and spotty rain. It's looking like a bright afternoon with some sunshine. But for all of us, it's a breezy day, I think, and as we end Tuesday, there'll be further showers coming into the north, largely dry further south. And we do it all again on Thursday and Friday, most of the unsettled weather affecting northern areas.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank. My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Very good morning. Welcome back to Bev Turner today on GB News. Before midday, we're looking into the Prime Minister's £1 billion emergency care plan announced less than an hour ago as he tries to save your NHS. I don't know about you, but I have some serious questions about our Prime Minister's judgment following the sacking of Nadeem Zahawi and this secret government unit that's been spying on social media posts. Yours might have been amongst them. A shocking report was revealed over the weekend that lockdown sceptics were monitored throughout the pandemic, with the government liaising with media companies to quell dissenting voices. I'm going to be talking to the woman behind the investigation in just a moment, but that's all coming up after a look at the latest news with Tamsin.
Thanks very much, Bev. Good morning from the GB newsroom. It's 1 minute past 11. The government has announced a £1 billion emergency care plan for England today as the NHS continues to face severe pressures. Rishi Sunak is promising 800 new ambulances, 5,000 more hospital beds, as well as expanding urgent care to people's homes. That's over the next 2 years. Experts warn there should be a bigger focus on staff shortages and pay, but the Prime Minister says his new plan is the best chance at cutting waiting lists.
That, in a nutshell, is the plan, with more beds, more ambulances, more staff, better social care. And if we can deliver on it, then I think we will see, in fact, I know we will see, the largest and fastest ever improvement in emergency waiting times in the NHS's history. That is the ambition of our plan that we've set out today.
The Labour Party is urging the Prime Minister to reveal what he knew about the investigation into Nadeem Zahawi's tax affairs and when. Labour's Deputy Leader Angela Rayner has written to Mr Sunak urging him to come clean. The Prime Minister sacked the Conservative Party chairman on Sunday after an ethics inquiry found he'd committed a serious breach of the ministerial code. Conservative MP for Lichfield, Michael Fabricant, told GB News getting rid of Mr Zahawi was the right decision.
You know, paying a penalty is not that unusual when you're in dispute with HMRC. And YouGov, as you know, is a very big corporation with offices in the United Kingdom, America and other countries. So I was sympathetic. But, you know, it was becoming a distraction. Yes, Nadeem Zahawi did tell the civil servants that there was a dispute going on, but it should have been in writing. You have to do things properly. But I can tell you, as a former minister, that the ministerial code is quite complicated, so people do make mistakes. But I think Rishi was absolutely right to wait, and I think was absolutely right to make the decision that he did.
Last-minute talks between teaching unions and the government are being held today in an effort to avoid strike action in England and Wales. Teachers are planning to strike on Wednesday in a dispute over pay and conditions, with up to 23,000 schools affected. It's expected to be the biggest day of industrial action to hit the UK in decades, with up to 500,000 public service workers, including train drivers, teachers and civil servants, also taking action. The government says it can't afford to meet the pay demands of every industry taking action. Further strikes are also planned, however, for February and March. Meanwhile, firefighters could vote today for their first nationwide strike over pay for 20 years. The Fire Brigades Union says its members have experienced a 12% drop in real terms earnings since 2010. Last November, members rejected a pay rise of 5%. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has urged peers to back proper penalties for disruptive protesters in a proposed new law. The government says the changes to the Public Order Bill would allow police officers to intervene before protesters become highly disruptive and use these new powers with demonstrators blocking roads or slow marching. Unions and rights groups have described the new bill as a historic attack on democratic rights. The family of 15-year-old Holly Newton, who was stabbed to death in Northumbria, have paid tribute to their much-loved and bubbly girl. Holly was found injured on Friday and died from her wounds in hospital. A 16-year-old boy is appearing in court today, charged with her murder. A major search is underway after a woman has gone missing in Lancashire while walking her dog. 45-year-old Nicola Booley was last seen 2 days ago on a footpath in St Michael's on Weir. Police are urging anyone with information to come forward. Boris Johnson says Vladimir Putin threatened to kill him just weeks before Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The comment was made during a phone call after Mr Johnson visited Kiev to show support for Ukraine. He made the claim in a BBC documentary.
He threatened me at one point and said, Boris, I don't want to hurt you, but with a missile it would only take a minute or something like that, jolly. But I think from the very relaxed tone that he was taking, the sort of air of detachment that he seemed to have, he was just playing along with my attempts to get him to negotiate.
Well, the Kremlin has responded to the former Prime Minister's claim, describing it as a lie. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Bev.
Good morning. Welcome back to Bev Turner today on GB News TV and DAB Radio. Here's what's coming up on the show this morning. The Prime Minister has defended his decision to sack Nadhim Zahawi as Tory party chair following a row over his tax affairs, saying that integrity is really important to me. It came as Mr Sunak announced plans to support struggling emergency care services in the NHS today. The £1 billion proposal would be used to fund thousands of new hospital beds and 800 new ambulances. And is Big Brother watching you? We'll be looking into a new report from Big Brother Watch, the Ministry of Truth. It looks at secretive Whitehall units which will be monitoring online speech of government critics. Yes, you heard that correctly. I'll be talking to this damning report's author, Silky Carlo, within the hour. And of course, this show is much improved with you and your views. Email me gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews to have your say. So the Prime Minister is under pressure over his own knowledge of Nadhim Zahawi's tax affairs. Rishi Sunak said, integrity is really important to me, as he defended his decision to sack the Conservative Party chairman following a row over his tax. Labour, meanwhile, have written to Mr Sunak asking him what he knew about the investigation into Mr Zahawi's tax affairs and when he knew this information. Now, let's get more analysis from political consultant and strategist Peter Barnes. Peter, good morning to you. What are your thoughts on the chronology of this particular drama? Did Rishi Sunak get it right? And how important is it for us to know what he knew and particularly when?
I think the Prime Minister has got this right. It just seems to have taken a long time to get to the right answer. That seems to be my main criticism of it. Rishi needs to come, I don't think come clean is the right phrase, but does need to be very honest about what he knew and when, mainly because the Conservatives' main problem at the moment seems to be trust. We've had Partygate, we had the Owen Paterson affair, we've had the Chris Pincher incident. There's been a succession of Tory MPs badly behaving, and I think that's one of the reasons they're doing so badly in the polls, so they can keep announcing all the policies they like, but until they actually get the trust of the public back, I don't think it really is going to make an ounce of difference.
You know, we have this idea that with these 7 principles of a public life that all of our public servants should adhere to: selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty and leadership. Given that we now know that Rishi Sunak is certainly guilty of not adhering to the public principle of honesty, shouldn't he have the whip taken away, not just lose his cabinet position? He should be gone completely, shouldn't he?
Well, that's always a matter up for the whips. It's a matter for Downing Street itself to decide. There are certain other factors you have to put into play. It's also, can you keep the backbenchers happy? Because there are rumours right now that Mr Zahawi is not going to back down from this fight anytime soon. And I imagine Downing Street would rather this story go away purely because they want to roll out with this £1 billion emergency plan for the NHS. So they really want to get on with the agenda. One of the reasons I think Mr Zahawi's gone relatively quickly is because this story became a distraction. I think it was Michael Fabricant you had on your show, on the show earlier, saying that this was a distraction. I think that's why Zahawi has gone, and they're hoping that if he allows him to keep the whip, he might just keep his mouth shut.
The thing is, Peter, Zahawi has a rather long track record of lying, effectively. This has now been proven by this ethics investigation. He was also the gentleman that stood up in the House of Commons and said, we have no plans for vaccine passports, whilst they were tendering contracts for vaccine passports. He said, we have no plans to vaccinate children, whilst those plans were being put in place via the JCVI. So I think from a voter's point of view, there will be a lot of anger out there that he doesn't just go, that he isn't made to leave at this particular point. And having just seen Rishi Sunak speaking this morning and seeing how our viewers are getting in touch, I've got a whole page of views. People deeply dislike, even lifelong Conservative members deeply dislike Rishi Sunak, and they are scared that if he doesn't take more action, he is going to lose the next election.
Well, I can understand the anger. I really can. Trust me, as a Conservative myself, it is annoying when these stories come about. But I do think people have to look at the whole board, as it were. Mr. Zahawi is rather well liked on the backbenches. He does have a strong reputation in Westminster, and he has been an effective minister in certain areas. I do agree with you that over the vaccine passports, on all those issues, I thought, well, hello, I thought he was out the door then. I was surprised when Mr. Sunak put him back in his cabinet in the first place, that I will say. But whether this is going to bring down the Prime Minister, I don't think so. I think this is one of these kind of, it's another story to the camel's back. I don't think it's the straw that's going to break it just yet. But I know I completely get people's anger because, trust me, I was speaking to with MPs just pretty much all over the weekend, and they were just like, he needs to go. What he needs to do, really, if I was Mr. Zahawi, take the rap on the knuckles, go to the back benches and be quiet for a little while, regain your reputation a little bit, maybe work in some charity sectors, do something like that, and then try and get back into government. My problem, I think, is he's going to try and blame the media for a lot of this. If you read his letter, I think that made it very clear that he's not apologised for any of it. I think that's also annoyed an awful lot of people, even lifelong Conservatives, that he's got caught doing something. Hold your hands up and say, I got caught.
Absolutely. Sunak must be slightly terrified of him. Peter, let me read you what some of our viewers have been saying in relation to Rishi Sunak's performance this morning up in County Durham. Nick said his movements could be replicated by sellotaping paper arms onto a wooden spoon and twisting it fast. So Salesforce team leader, no gravitas in the office of Prime Minister anymore. Truss started to restore it, and they did for her. Looking at all of them, politics is in a dark place. Bernard emails, what a sham. All these questions have been set up for him. It stands out a mile. Peter says, watching Rishi, you might as well be watching a stick of Brighton Rock. No charisma whatsoever. How would you as a strategist, deal with that man running for the next general election?
Well, I would actually do what they're doing right now, and that's getting Rishi on the road. I was really surprised that for some time Rishi was basically non-existent. He didn't look like he was in charge of anything. Jeremy Hunt was basically running the country, according to a lot of people. And I think that's where a lot of this is coming from. The problem is, for the last 2 weeks, when they tried to get him out on the road, you had him getting a fixed penalty notice, and then you had this Zahawi thing. So he's somewhat of a victim of events, I think, Rishi, if I'm being honest. But one thing I really do with him is he needs to sound more ministerial, sound more prime ministerial. He's not really got the gravitas at the moment. He's got the policy down. He's got the kind of hard work and commitment. I don't doubt that for a second. But he's not really got the I'm the prime minister vibe. That's one thing you could always give Boris Johnson.
Yeah.
You might not have agreed with him, but he looked like a prime minister.
OK, Peter Barnes, political consultant, thank you so much. I get the feeling he's just got one foot out the door all the time, don't you? Not Peter, I meant Rishi Sunak. GB News political correspondent Tom Harwood is with me in the studio. Hi, Tom. Let's just have a quick listen, Tom, before I come to you, to what Sunak said when he was asked about sacking Zahawi.
What I've done is follow a process, which is the right process. Integrity is really important. To me, all of you guys want to see that government's run properly, that it's run with integrity, and there's accountability when people don't behave in a way that they should or when something doesn't go right, and that's what we've done.
Tom Harwood, go on. What do you think of him this morning? Did he impress you at all?
I think it's really interesting when we watch Rishi Sunak at these sort of events. This is the second PM Connect event that he has now
Who's
done.
come up with that, Tom? Who, if you were advising him, you wouldn't call it PM Connect. He's not a broadband service. Don't behave like one.
Well, it's interesting because this was actually in Darlington this morning, where the Treasury campus is. And when he was Chancellor, he started these events called Treasury Connect. So it's really following through with what he believed was a sensible formula. Perhaps he thought it served him well as Chancellor. I have to say probably the most of the country didn't know about it.
Yeah.
But clearly he prefers this sort of one-to-one interaction with voters in a relatively controlled environment compared to perhaps his predecessors, Boris Johnson, for example, who might have preferred a big rally, as we saw on a number of occasions during the Brexit campaign and the 2019 general election campaign too. Rishi Sunak is one of those politicians who would rather a smaller, more intimate environment. And to be fair to him, he is on top of detail. He can point to the amount of money going from X to Y or the number of extra beds or whatever it is. He can sort of recall that. It's just the way that he presents it can sometimes seem almost too analytical and perhaps not personal enough.
Well, he's
Perhaps
like
there's-
a memory robot, isn't he, Tom? Like, he's really good at passing exams, which is why he was head boy of Winchester. But where's the humanity? The irony of calling it PM Connect when what he fails to do is connect.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point there, because obviously a lot of the criticism is that idea that he doesn't really know what life is like, because he has had a pretty fortunate life. Now, he would point to, and as he did during the summer in the leadership contest, sort of how his parents weren't, you know, as wealthy as he is now.
Yeah.
They were relatively
Nobody is as wealthy
middle.
as he is now.
No, well, that's fairly true. He's richer than the king. But sort of his parents sort of managing a pharmacy growing up, sort of were managing payroll. Sort of it wasn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't.
He wasn't born with a silver spoon,
He wasn't born with a silver spoon, but he wasn't born in poverty either. And I think that he tried to sort of get that across. But also, obviously, for his whole adult life, he has been a very wealthy individual, and he did go to a very good school. He did sort of have a lot of privileges in life. And that may well be sort of more difficult if you're then trying to say, I know what it's like. Almost, it might be a better idea for Rishi Sunak to sort of lean into how Boris Johnson did things, which was when he was asked, what's the price of a loaf of bread? He'd say, I've no idea, but I can tell you the price of a bottle of champagne. In a way that's sort of honest, in a way that Jacob Rees-Mogg is honest about who he is, doesn't pretend to be anything he isn't, doesn't forget the football team he's supposed to be supporting that week. It's sometimes that sort of honesty can cut through in a better way. But I'm not here to advise Rishi Sunak. I'm just sort of
I think you should be, Tom.
Observing the way in which these sort of events, which are clearly designed to emulate John Major's successful 1992 election campaign, where he got out his soapbox and went from town to town, standing on that soapbox, saying what he was doing. In many ways, that's a sort of similar thing to what Rishi Sunak is doing, but ultimately, John Major was a boy from Brixton who didn't go to university, who'd done good, who became Prime Minister. There was that famous 1992 election poster from the Conservatives. What do the Conservatives do for a boy from Brixton? They made him Prime Minister.
Well,
that's something they can't do with the head boy of Winchester College.
No, that's right. But again, so the comparison is brilliant, because also John Major wasn't naturally the most charismatic, but he did manage to be himself and pushed himself over the line. Will Rishi Sunak be able to do the same thing? Who knows? Anyway, Tom Harwood, thank you. Right, coming up in just a moment, our panellists will be back to talk about the sacking of Nadine Zahawi and how Lady Susan Hussey has reunited with King Charles. Quick break now, see you in 2.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back.
Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes. Already to bless.
Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236,
And YouView, channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Very good morning. It's 11:22. This is Bev Turner today on GB News. Right, my panel are back with me this morning. I'm joined by author and journalist Laura Dodsworth and political commentator Emma Burnell. We were just working out that Emma knows Laura from Laura's books. If you're not familiar with
I know
Laura's
parts
books,
of Laura.
there are parts of Laura. As a photographer, she did an amazing book about boobs, and then you did one about willies.
Yes,
and then you did one about vulvas.
About breasts, manhood about penises, and womanhood about vulvas, which is the Channel 4 documentary 100 Vaginas. Eclectic. It's an eclectic career trajectory. It makes sense if you think about it, I promise.
Now, from talking about that to talking about Nadeem Zahawi, that's how we can gear change it.
I can't imagine the connection.
I know, don't. You have no idea of the lines in my head that I resisted coming out of my mouth at that particular moment. Laura, were you surprised by the news over the weekend that he'd got the boot from the Cabinet, or not?
No, I wasn't surprised. I think he probably should have resigned as chairman earlier.
I agree.
But I think there's a couple of ways to go about this. It's just like resign quickly. It's not as though there aren't enough stories of corruption and sleaze in the Tory party, so do the right thing. But I would say that having gone down this due process, this ethics route, I think he should have then been given a chance to respond. I think if you're going to go down that route, make it really full, make it really clean, because now he's got the opportunity to say this wasn't the full due process. I wasn't given my chance.
I mean, he did write his letter, didn't he, blaming the media?
Yeah.
Well, live by the sword, die by the sword. They all use the media whichever way it suits them all the time. I think what's more interesting about this really is that Rishi Sunak promised 6 months ago to publish his own tax affairs, and he still hasn't. And of course, yeah, and his wife saved up approximately £20 million by having non-dom status. So I think that the party as a whole really needs to clean its house out. It's not just Nadeem Zahawi. I don't blame them for not wanting to pay taxes, though, because look at how most of it's wasted.
Absolutely. Do you think, Emma, that he should lose the whip as well?
He seems to have... There are 7 quite serious counts of breaking not just the ministerial code, but the standards on public life, the Nolan principles, which MPs are supposed to abide by. And I think there are expectations we should be able to have of people who are making our laws, whereby they don't try to fiddle it around. And just to me, it seems really pathetic that he's just... I mean, when you become the chair of the Tory party, you're the embodiment of that party. His job was to go on the media and say, we're great, you're terrible. That's, and he just couldn't do that. Yeah. I also find it very funny that while we were sitting in the break, I got a breaking news alert from the BBC. Rishi Sunak says he's been pretty decisive.
Rishi Sunak's been pretty decisive.
Do not... I mean, as a comms person, please do not use a qualifier when you're telling yourself decisive. just basic.
Yeah. I've been fairly decisive. Could have been a little bit more. But I think what's so shocking, though, Laura, is what do you have to do to ever lose the whip these days? I mean, it is astonishing.
Talk about vaccine harms.
Good point. Andrew Bridgen did exactly that. Yeah. Yes, of course. I mean... The fact that they said to him, are you being investigated? Is there anything we should know? No, there's nothing you should know. And he was being investigated by the HMRC at that point. the barefaced dishonesty of that.
Well, both Rishi Sunak and Nadhim Zahawi have been Chancellors of the Exchequer, and while there's no aspersion that Rishi Sunak's done anything illegal, of course his wife saved a mint by being non-dom, Nadhim Zahawi was Chancellor of the Exchequer and not being upfront about being investigated by HMRC. Don't forget, though, when he was Minister for Health, he said categorically that vaccine passports would not be introduced while there were tenders out to companies to develop vaccine passport back-end software. So it's not the first time that he's... What do we call it this day? We don't call it a lie, we call it a public untruth or something. So, you know, it's not the first time he hasn't been upfront.
No. Right, OK, moving on now to a slightly different story. A lovely story, actually, it's in the papers today. This is a lady who... 76 years old, and she basically became a fitness influencer in her 70s, which is just so brilliant. I think we've got some pictures of her. She celebrated her birthday by zip-lining across a canyon. She's gone whitewater rafting, parachuting, skydiving on my bucket list for future birthdays. This is so brilliant, isn't it, Emma?
It's wonderful. It reminds me of two things. First of all, I'm currently writing a play which is centred on a group of women who meet every week. It's like a Slimming World type group. And one of them is doing her bucket list and they all decide to do it with her.
Yeah.
But also, every Friday morning at 9:30, I get a WhatsApp video call with my sister and my mum. And my mum, my 72-year-old mum, leads us in a really quite tough Pilates session.
Really?
And so she is this... she's my fit influencer. I can't say it.
Yeah. Do you know, the thing is, Laurie, we talk about retirement. We were talking about retirement a lot last week with the age of retirement being raised. And therefore, what is it to be a 60-year-old now? What is it to be a 67-year-old? Do you think we're all kind of roughly about 10 years younger than we would have been when we were growing up?
Absolutely. I mean, I turned 50 last week. As far as I'm concerned, 50 is the new 30.
Yeah.
So by the time I'm 70, I'll be 50. I find this a really inspiring story because I think it sets a great example to young people. I hope young people see this. You know, in the US, 1 in 5 children and teenagers are obese. And what have government guidelines said? That kids in their early teens, if they're obese, should have drug loss therapy, drugs and surgery. And here's somebody in her 70s who's ditched her medication and lost 5 stone and is now ziplining across canyons and lifting weights.
Yeah.
That's how life could be. Not for everybody, sure, but there's a lot you can do by adopting a healthy diet and lifestyle. So I find it really encouraging. That's going to be me when I'm 70.
This is here we are. We have a picture of her here, Joan McDonald. She is American. She's become this fitness inspiration. She looks fabulous, doesn't she? Look at her there, lifting weights. Brilliant.
I mean, I have to say, I lost a great deal. I mean, obviously, I've still got more to go, but I lost a great deal of weight in my early 40s. I also became single in my early 40s. I have had a freaking brilliant decade.
You did brilliant.
The 40s really are your new 20s as far as my lifestyle was concerned.
I remember we were talking last time you were here, Emma, and you were showing me some photos. Remind us how much weight you lost.
I've lost 12.5 stone.
12.5 stone. That is remarkable. Well done. And you had surgery, didn't you?
I had surgery which basically helps. It's like a kickstart. The effects of it don't last that long, but if you can take that moment and run with it. So I'm now eating normally and I exercise a lot and I'm able to do things I just couldn't do before. So I've said before, I walk everywhere. I refuse a car to come to and from the studio because for me, it's really important to build that 20 minutes walking each way into my day and make sure that that's just my natural instinct all the time, to be moving, to keep walking, to eat less. I couldn't have done it, I think, without having that kickstart.
Yeah.
But I also know that kickstart was not the whole story.
Yeah. And I know you've spoken before, Emma, really openly about the psychological relationship that we have with food and how important it is to really address that.
Absolutely. The change doesn't come here, it comes up here. And you've got to do the work in your head before you can do anything else. And you have to change what can be a very, very negative spiral into a positive loop. And that does come from all sorts of different things. And you do need to deal with all of those problems. And it is really hard because food addiction is an addiction like anything else. But what you can't do is give up food completely. So you have to eat in a measured way. It's like asking an alcoholic to drink a glass of wine a day, but only one.
Yeah.
It's
yeah,
really
it's a brilliant
hard.
analogy, actually, when you put it like that. Right, thank you, ladies. Now, coming up in just a little while is Big Brother watching you. I'm going to be looking into a report which shows that your tweets and Facebook posts could pose a risk to your free speech. That's all after your morning's news with Tamsin.
Bev, thank you. Good morning from the GB newsroom. It's 11:31. Here are the headlines. The government has announced a £1 billion emergency care plan for England today as the NHS continues to face severe pressures. Rishi Sunak is promising 800 new ambulances, 5,000 more hospital beds, as well as expanding urgent care to people's homes over the next 2 years. Experts warn there should be a bigger focus on staff shortages and pay, but the Prime Minister says his new plan is the best chance at cutting waiting lists.
That, in a nutshell, is the plan, with more beds, more ambulances, more staff, better social care. And if we can deliver on it, then I think we will see, in fact, I know we will see, the largest and fastest ever improvement in emergency waiting times in the NHS's history. That is the ambition of our plan that we've set out today.
The Prime Minister has this morning defended his handling of the Nadeem Zahawi row, saying he acted decisively. Mr Sunak has been under pressure to reveal what he knew about the investigation into Zahawi's tax affairs and when, with Labour's Deputy Leader Angela Rayner urging him to come clean. The Prime Minister sacked the Conservative Party chairman on Sunday after an ethics inquiry found he'd committed a serious breach of the ministerial code. Conservative MP for Lichfield, Michael Fabricant, told GB News getting rid of Mr Zahawi was the right decision.
You know, paying a penalty is not that unusual when you're in dispute with HMRC. And YouGov, as you know, is a very big corporation with offices in the United Kingdom, America, and other countries. So I was sympathetic. But, you know, it was becoming a distraction. Yes, Nadeem Zahawi did tell the civil servants that there was a dispute going on, but it should have been in writing. You have to do things properly. But I can tell you, as a former minister, that the ministerial code is quite complicated, so people do make mistakes. But I think Rishi was absolutely right to wait, and I think was absolutely right to make the decision that he did.
Last-minute talks between teaching unions and the government are being held today in an effort to avoid strike action in England and Wales. Teachers are planning to strike on Wednesday in a dispute over pay and conditions, with up to 23,000 schools affected. It's expected to be the biggest day of industrial action to hit the UK in decades, with up to 500,000 public service workers, including train drivers and civil servants, also taking action. The government says it can't afford to meet the pay demands of every industry. Further strikes are also planned for February and March. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News.
He's the king of breakfast TV and he's back.
Eamon Holmes back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes. Already to bless.
Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday.
Can't be too safe. Bring it on. Has there ever been a more innuendo feature?
And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous.
Just get on with it. Maybe you should get a proper job.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Very good morning, it's 11:36. This is Bev Turner Today on GB News. Now, a new report says that academics, journalists and politicians who criticised the government's COVID response were spied upon. Civil liberties organisation Big Brother Watch has obtained documents that show agencies whose job it is to tackle hostile state misinformation. It also targeted critics of the government. So joining me now to explain more is the director of Big Brother Watch, Silky Carlo. Silky, really good morning. Great to see you. So you and your organisation were behind this. Tell us how it all started and what has the process been like to access this information?
Good to see you and thanks for having me. This started right at the beginning of the pandemic, that we heard about some counter misinformation units that were started in government. And because this impacts freedom of speech, of course, we wanted to know what it was that they were doing. And they were totally resistant to any kind of transparency, which of course makes one a bit suspicious about what they might be doing. And so after a really long and tireless investigation, we have found that far from working on disinformation, these units have been monitoring and recording critics of government, and that includes some of the most expert voices that there are on the extreme policies that the government was implementing, whether it was lockdown modelling or mass testing, vaccine passports they were highly interested in. And so we've seen people from members of parliament to journalists and world-leading academics recorded by these so-called misinformation units. And these units, it has to be said, have a special relationship with big tech. So they can flag information to the companies that they think should be suppressed or censored.
It's sort of, did you ever think, Silky, in your lifetime you would have such clear-cut evidence of this sort of surveillance going on within the UK?
I mean, it's coming out now. It's come out in the Twitter files as well, that there, in the US, there were close relationships between government agencies and big tech companies. Of course, I hoped that, this would never happen. And, we've called the report Ministry of Truth in Orwellian style, because this really is an Orwellian script. And I have pinched myself throughout this investigation at the things that we have found, let alone the British Army whistleblower that spoke to us from the 77th Brigade, highly secretive unit, who revealed to us that they were spying on the population at large as well, with absolutely no safeguards to mean that Brits weren't part of their investigation. These are people that claim to be fighting Russian troll farms and this kind of thing, and actually they were spying on our own population. So, we need to see, this information is coming out now, we need to see change. I'm asking anyone who cares about this, please go to our website. The campaign site is minitruth.co.uk and sign the petition. Join us, because unless we unravel this now, it's staying for good. The counter-disinformation unit that we've exposed is now a permanent unit within government working on other topics, not the pandemic. We don't know what. So it needs to be shut down. This counter-disinformation unit needs to be suspended immediately, and we need to open an investigation into exactly what happened.
So let me play devil's advocate for a minute here, Silky. Some might say, perhaps, that there need to be these governmental departments, perhaps monitoring potential terrorist activities. Do you feel that the line has been blurred without enough public scrutiny of those decisions?
Absolutely. And I think, terrorists should be monitored online. And I think the reason that this counter misinformation effort has enjoyed so much political support is because where there's been this vacuum of information about what they're actually doing, people have just kind of made it up. People assume that they're fighting Russian disinformation and, Chinese bots and all this kind of stuff. But now we see the truth. Professor Carl Hennigan from Oxford is not a terrorist. David Davis, one of the most senior people in the Conservative Party, is not a domestic threat. And yet these people were being described as threats, anti-vaxxers, all these ridiculous slurs that weren't true, misinformation, if you like, and being compiled in reports. These are also people that experience censorship online during this period, which I think is no coincidence. So, yes, of course, there's a place for the activity of state agencies, sometimes secret activity where people's lives are at risk and so on. But here we had difference of opinions. And I have to say, actually, a lot of the opinions that the government was so worried about have been vindicated in the long run. For example, our campaign against vaccine passports.
Absolutely. Silky, we've got to move on. The Downing Street source, thank you so much. And thank you for all your work in this. I think you do remarkable work at Big Brother Watch and just trying to keep us safe in the future, all of us. Downing Street source said the units had scaled back their work significantly since the end of the lockdowns. It's all right then. Director at Big Brother Watch, Silky Carlo there. Now, the Prime Minister has announced ambitious and credible measures to tackle the NHS crisis, including a £1 billion emergency care plan today. Rishi Sunak's pledged 800 new ambulances, 5,000 more hospital beds, as well as expanding urgent care to people's homes.
More beds, more ambulances, more staff, better social care. And if we can deliver on it, then I think we will see, in fact, I know we will see, the largest and fastest ever improvement in emergency waiting times in the NHS's history. That is the ambition of our plan that we've set out today.
So if you are joining us, let's speak to, just joining us, and you missed that speech, let's talk to GB News political editor Darren McCaffrey. Good morning, Darren. Rishi Sunak likes a 5-point plan, doesn't he? He had another 5 points in this speech this morning. What were the headlines for you?
Yeah, really fascinating, isn't it, given the state that the NHS is in, given the fact, actually, that we're, midway through this winter crisis. The Prime Minister has come up with a plan, though he is, just 100 days into the job, to try and deal with many of the really difficult months the National Health Service is facing. But this is kind of part of a much more medium, longer-term plan to try and improve things like ambulance waiting times and indeed the backlog that we see in hospitals. One of the big problems, Bev, is that you've got a number of people who frankly shouldn't be in hospital anymore, that they are able or should be able to be discharged, but there is no one or nowhere for them to go. So the government today, Prime Minister announcing, as you say, those 5,000 new beds, which are going to boost capacity in the NHS by about 5%. But also increase the number of ambulances available by 10%, around 800 new vehicles, part of that £1 billion plan. Now, the big problem is who's going to staff all of these, because we know that 1 in 10 jobs in the NHS remain vacant. The government is unable to fill them. The King's Trust today saying that they think this issue is hard to see how it's actually going to have a major impact on the problems facing the National Health Service, though the Prime Minister insisting that this is part of that wider plan to bring down waiting times. And he was also unsurprisingly asked about nurses' pay and pay across the board when it comes to paramedics too, again insisting that the government is open to a pay settlement with those trade unions. But in the end, they couldn't give away above inflation busting pay rise, if you like, because that would only make things worse. Interestingly, though, the politics today from all the journalists was focused on Nadeem Zahawi, the chairman of the Conservative Party, who was sacked yesterday by the Prime Minister. The PM repeatedly clear that he felt he acted decisively when he got that report that Nadeem Zahawi had broken the ministerial code. Though in the end, many would suggest he didn't necessarily act that decisively, that it took actually quite a long time to set up that probe. This was a Prime Minister who stood up in the House of Commons at Prime Minister's Question Time only a couple of weeks ago, saying that all the questions had been answered in this case, that there was nothing else to see here. Well, that clearly wasn't the case, and that is why opposition MPs today are saying the Prime Minister didn't act quickly enough, and also some suggesting that Nadeem Zahawi should not just be kicked out of the Cabinet, as he has been, but also out of the Conservative Party too.
OK, thank you, Darren. Our viewers have been getting in touch, actually, about Rishi Sunak's speech this morning, carrying on from that. This tweeter says, note the use of the words, if we can deliver. I think they've proved over 13 years that delivery is a problem for these Tories. Kevin says, unless you have better NHS management, this money will be wasted. Mark says, the more I see Sunak, the less optimistic I find myself. He comes across as a school prefect talking to his classmates. Just loads of you getting in touch on those lines. It's really hard. Here we go. I found a positive one. Paddy. Well done, Paddy. You're a man on your own. I thought he came across as positive and personable. Part of his job is to try to lift morale. If he comes on stage like the Grim Reaper, he won't be thanked for it. It's the first major NHS announcement. Give him a chance. Thank you, Paddy. Trying to provide a little balance, but it is quite difficult on that particular topic. Right, my guests are still here with me, Laura Dodsworth and political commentator Emma Burnell. Laura, let me just back-ref, if I might, with you, the interview that I just did there with Silkie Carlo, because you are, of course, one of these journalists that is mentioned as being watched by the government. Were you surprised to see your name on that list?
No, not at all, because the title of my book accused the government of weaponising fear during the pandemic. I think the problem is that, once these units were set up, and once a government describes itself as being on a wartime footing for a virus, the inevitable result is that the propaganda machine, the surveillance apparatus is turned upon people. So whereas once units like the 77th or the Counter-Disinformation Unit would have been looking at enemy states or terrorists, when you describe people as biohazards, when you say the threat is a virus that we carry in our bodies, we become the enemy. And that's what happened. The problem now is, of course, the units aren't dismantled, they're still there. We don't know what they're doing. And as Silkie Carlo says, they really need to be taken down. When the government's on first-name terms with social media companies and is able to tell them to take down posts, content, videos, flag articles as disinformation, when the content is not just lawful but truthful, we have a real problem.
Yeah. And because it is a censorship level, isn't it? It is about a measure. It is about reducing open, honest debate, which leads to informed consent about, in this case, medical choices, perhaps. This
affects reputations and the careers of the people that they monitor as well, because this is a slur. This is a slur upon the people in the report who were targeted, whose social media profiles and potentially income and businesses were affected. I mean, in my own case, when my book launched, there was a very strange situation where it disappeared from Amazon for the first 4 days. And there was no satisfactory answer from Amazon as to why both the book title and my name were totally unfindable. And the author page, my author page, was taken down. Who knows? Who knows? Perhaps it was a weird algorithmic glitch, but a strange coincidence.
Absolutely. Amazon aren't here to defend themselves, of course, against that particular allegation, but
it's
does raise
amusing.
questions.
Amusing,
it is,
not an
it is
allegation.
amusing.
Yeah.
Right. We're now going to talk about Prince Andrew. Right. OK, Emma. What chance does he have of going back to court now to clear his name over the Virginia Roberts allegation? He settled out of court, of course. And now, apparently, his hopes of coming back are wishful thinking, according to some commentators. What do you reckon?
So there seem to be two stories here. One, that he's thinking of going back and challenging the court decision that he's already accepted, which is bonkers. And secondly, that he wants to return to public life, which, frankly, is almost as bonkers. If he wants the latter, drop the former. Let it settle. Give it a few years. Chill out. You're a rich man. You've got no need there is no right to having a public life. You don't have a automatic right to be famous. If he wants to do things, there are plenty of ways that he could, if he wants to do things for charity, go and actually get your hands dirty and do something in that way. It doesn't have to be walking around and shaking people's hands in front of some cameras.
Because this is the point that he wants to return to the front line of royal public life, apparently. And according to an inside source in the Mail today, the King respects his brother's right to try and clear his name, but any hopes it will pave the way back to official duties are way off the mark, apparently.
Well, in terms of clearing his name, he has paid this settlement. He has accepted that in the court of public opinion, at least, he's paid the settlement. He's said, hands up, I'm going to give you the money, make it go away. that everybody knows what that means in the court of public opinion. Whatever the legal, official legalese of it, we know what that means. I think he's just got to accept that his life has changed and he now needs to learn how to build the new life that he has.
Just playing devil's advocate again, just for a moment, Laura Dodsworth. If it is true that he had to make this go away because of the Queen's Jubilee, etc., that was coming up, so that, just make that lady go away and give her several million quid, does he have a right then to try and clear his name?
I think it's a really bizarre decision. He's a fully grown man. He's an adult, a prince, an ex-serviceman.
It's the bit we forget.
He paid a huge settlement out of court. He did it. It's done.
Yeah.
And that was his tactic at the time. To then risk going back to court for more sordid details to come out doesn't make this go away. It will make it go on longer. Yeah. No one's going to buy it. I mean, there was that ridiculous picture demonstrating that he couldn't possibly have licked a lady's toes in a bath because the bath was too small. Sorry, anyone who's frolicked in a bath knows there's a lot you can do in the space of a bath.
Yeah, it's
I mean,
not like you keep
that
your
was
lips
not hard
in that situation.
That was not hard court-safe evidence at all, that picture of two people in a bath.
The things that come out on this breakfast bar had David Starkey saying we were talking about Love Island last week, saying he was partial to a bit of pornography, and now I've had you confessing the antics in a bath, Laura. This is the tell-all breakfast bar of truthfulness, isn't it?
Hypothetical bath imaginings. Yeah. That's all that's going on here.
It's all very flimsy, isn't it? It's all very, very flaky, and unless he has some sort of hard proof, what is this going to look like? He's not going to... Virginia Roberts, Guthrie, whatever, she's never going to turn around and go, actually, yeah, you're right, I made it all up. He's never going to have the absolution that he's seeking.
I mean, it just reeks of entitlement, arrogance and narcissism. Yeah. Like Emma says, if he wants to return to public life, it should be through doing good works to demonstrate his moral character rather than try to clear his name in order to be a famous member of the royal family
Show,
again.
don't tell. Show us your character. Don't tell us how good it is. Right. ChatGPT. I don't know whether you're familiar with ChatGPT. This is an app which enables anybody, but primarily at the moment it seems school children, to come up with huge pieces of copy, Emma, which otherwise would have taken hours of toil from the likes of you and I to come up with. Is it as good as they make it sound?
It does sound like it is very good.
I know.
I am... As someone who writes in various formats for a living, it's blooming terrifying to me. I wonder how much of a fad it's going to be, how much it will go beyond where it is now. I also think there is a slight moral panic. Every time something new comes along, we panic about the new thing and forget all the old ways we used to cheat the system.
Yeah.
I mean, I often tell the story of when I did my GCSEs, my boyfriend at the time did his GCSEs at the same time. He only got his coursework GCSEs and art because he was a bloody good artist. Funnily enough, it wasn't him who wrote most of that coursework.
The scandal! And you sit there criticising the Conservative politicians.
I know. It's just, my 16-year-old me has a lot to be ashamed for.
But Laura, you've also written several books and hundreds of articles. Will this sort of AI ever replace us?
Well, it could do. I mean, it's really good, I'll be honest.
I know.
I've got
you tried it?
Yeah, I've got a new book coming out this year, and my co-author and I decided to put one of our chapter ideas through ChatGPT to see what happened. Wrote a really good chapter. Now, I'll be honest, it wasn't as good as ours, because I think there's still human creativity, ingenuity and out-of-the-box thinking that it can't replace. And you've got to remember that with AI that it's not neutral. This is not politically and ideologically neutral. It's programmed by people who have their own biases. So it's no replacement for people. It's a replacement for a certain type of people, and it lacks ultimate ingenuity. But it is very good. It's going to change the way schools work. Kids are going to have to start writing their essays in lessons and doing non-replicable work, like certain types of research or reading out of lessons. They're going to have to swap it around.
You're right, because that's why this is in the papers today. It's saying that there's a headmaster of an influential, a very big private school in London, basically, who said that this is going to change the way children are assessed at school, because there is no longer the point of sending them home to write essays, Emma. And that its English department recently tested ChatGPT. Teachers gave an A* to the essay without knowing it was written by the robot. maybe when it comes to changing our education system, there does need to be some changes, because the idea of it being a memory test now for kids feels a little outdated.
Completely outdated. And I mean, I've long argued that we need to completely rethink how we do education and what it's for. I think all too often, we think of the ways of education and assessing education as just a regurgitation of a list of facts, rather than an understanding of what those facts mean in context and how we can interpret those. I think we teach kids to know things rather than to understand things.
Yeah,
and I don't know how you test that. I'm not an educational expert. But I do think that there's so much more to education about learning how to think rather than what to know.
Yeah. Right, ladies, we've lost our time for today. We're out of time. Laura Dodsworth, Emma Burnell, thank you so much. It's flown by this morning. Coming up next, it's GB News Live with Mark Longhurst. It is 3 years tomorrow since the UK left the EU. There's going to be plenty to discuss then. I'm Bev Turner. See you tomorrow morning at 10.
Hello there, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office. A dry day for most of us with some sunshine, the best of which will be in the east, cloudier skies generally in the west, ahead of a frontal system that will push in for later in the day. But this cold front that's crossing the channel now, that's brought some rain earlier on. It is now clearing to brighter skies, also a fresher feel for the north in particular, with cold northwesterly airflow that's easing through the rest of the day and taking its showers away with it, but further showers are likely to affect parts of Western Scotland and Northern Ireland at times, mostly light, and for many it's a dry day. Sunny spells in the east, 9 or 10 Celsius, cloudier skies further west, 8 or 9 Celsius, so temperatures not far from average. Into the evening, though, it turns increasingly wet across western Scotland, that rain pushing its way eastwards and into Northern Ireland by midnight, arriving into northern England during the early hours. Some heavy bursts of rain associated with this system as it moves southeastwards, followed by blustery showers into the north. An early frost possible in the southeast before things turn cloudy, and for most it's a frost-free start to Tuesday. A lot of cloud about for England and Wales, some outbreaks of rain pushing south during the morning. The rain tending to peter out, and it does clear by lunchtime with brighter skies.